The sandwich was gone. Catherine Weir stared into the fridge at the spot where her sandwich should be and let out an annoyed sigh. Despite knowing this would happen, she felt an incredible sense of injustice. This was the fifth day in a row. She always followed the golden rules of the communal work fridge. She wrote her name and the date on the faux Ziploc bag, placed it on the second shelf, which was too short to accommodate lunchboxes, and respected others' lunches by not touching them. The fact that someone had the audacity to breach the sanctity of those rules filled her with anger. As she stood in the kitchen with the fridge door open, she wondered who the sandwich pilferer might be. Could it be Roger from accounting? He was a gluttonous man who was never not eating something. Or maybe it was Trebecca, her team leader. She'd been acting pretty smug toward her lately, like she knew something Catherine didn't. In truth, it could be anyone at Work Corp. There were a couple ways of finding out who ate her lunch, but not all of them were as fun as she was planning. She took to making her lunch in an effort to save money. WorkCorp had a cafeteria downstairs, but the prices went up suddenly, so eating there was no longer economical. But for the fifth day in a row, she was going to make the journey downstairs. It doesn't make sense that I'm paying to feed someone else in addition to myself. Tomorrow, that will change. Catherine didn't think of herself as a petty or vindictive person, but that didn't mean she wasn't. Someone was deliberately eating her food in some sad, passive-aggressive attempt to express their displeasure with her. She was down to play that game too. That night, she went home and carefully crafted a sandwich for herself, and then another for her thief. Both sandwiches were lovingly made with thinly sliced Black Forest ham, thick slices of Munster cheese, Miracle Whip, and sprinkles of garlic salt and pepper. Only one sandwich contained a heaping helping of hellish hexwork, a spell procured from her sister Cassandra. Once the spellcraft was finished, Catherine carefully placed the spiritually spicy sandwich in a faux Ziploc bag and scrawled her name on it in Sharpie. She did the same for the untainted sandwich and then placed that one in a brown paper bag so as to not accidentally eat the wrong one. Monday morning passed quickly for Catherine. She completed her work with such unusual aplomb that her coworkers, mainly Yuji and Oliver, were concerned that she'd finally snapped. They watched her closely out of concern for her mental well-being. "You want to come down to the cafeteria with us?" Oliver asked at 12 o'clock on the dot. "I think they've got meatloaf today." He and Yuji leaned on her cubicle wall and watched her lock her computer. Catherine shook her head. "I brought my lunch today." She coolly slid her chair back from her desk and stood up. She collected her purse and gazed toward the break room. "I'm quite looking forward to it." "Are you sure it's going to be there?" Yuji asked incredulously. "Probably not," she said, "but I won't be going to the cafeteria today." She pulled a brown paper bag from her purse and shook it triumphantly. "I'll see you later." She left them standing at her desk, curious about what was going to happen. If all went according to plan, they'd find out soon enough. Catherine gazed into the fridge and saw the sandwich she placed in there was missing. She didn't feel anger or rage, not today. She simply closed the door, sat down at a nearby table, and pulled her sandwich out of her purse. Sure, it wasn't cold, but the revenge she was anxious to serve would be. No more than a minute after biting into her ham and cheese sandwich, Catherine observed a woman, inflated with self-importance, enter the break room. It was Trebecca. Upon seeing her, Trebecca couldn't stop herself from stopping by. "Hello, Kathy. Fancy meeting you here." Trebecca was a shorter woman who wore 6-inch heels to make up for the height she lacked. He used a fake Southern Belle accent to make up for the charm she lacked, and way too much makeup to compensate for the inner beauty she lacked. "What you got there, Kathy?" Catherine could count on no hands the amount of times she liked being called Kathy. She didn't like Kate or Katie either. She looked up at her supervisor and feigned a grin. "Oh, this whole thing? Just a ham and cheese sandwich." "All right." Catherine pretended not to know and glanced at her sandwich. She gasped in mock surprise as it was indeed on rye bread. "Oh, I guess it is. Have you ever seen a sandwich so divine?" She said this with a smirk and a fake Southern accent. Trebecca blanched at having her accent thrown back at her. So when she replied, she laid it on thicker. "I think I have. A little earlier, in fact." She gave her subordinate a knowing glare. I really do have to thank the sandwich artist at the deli. It truly was a work of art. Just the right amount of mayo. Catherine snorted because anyone who was anyone knew Miracle Whip could not be called mayo by any stretch of the imagination. It sounds lovely. It's good that you enjoyed it. It almost sounds better than mine. It probably was. Trebecca winked at her and turned to leave. Don't be late logging back in. She took 2 steps out of the room before she suddenly stopped. She placed her right hand on her chest above her heart and went, Oh my. Her neck bulged for a second before she opened her mouth to let a loud belch escape. Goodness gracious. She giggled before attempting to move on. She burped again. Just as she was about to apologize, her body was suddenly lifted a foot into the air. Her head tilted back, which allowed her mouth to open wide enough for flames to spew forth. Her fiery screams were accompanied by the cries of the souls of the damned as they were released from the spell that once contained them. Her body spun slowly as if on a vertical rotisserie. Blood slowly seeped from her eyes and dripped down her cherubic cheeks, down her white blouse, before finally collecting on the floor below. This spectacular event lasted for a minute before the flames petered out. The cries faded, and the blood dried. Trebecca fell to the floor in a fleshy heap. Her screams were now mournful whispers. No one else saw this. Only Catherine bore witness to the theater to which she had a front row seat. She continued to eat as she watched. When the sandwich was done, she stood up from the table and threw her paper bag away. She confidently walked over to Trebecca's slumped body and hunched down to look her boss in the face. Oh dear, Becca. You don't look so good. Catherine stared Trebecca straight into her dead eyes as she said this. That's too bad. At your age, you should really watch what you eat. Her gaze never broke as she stood up. The fear in Trebecca's eyes was just as delicious as the sandwich. She saw the recognition in her boss's eyes that she knew Catherine nor her lunch were to be fucked with. I'll see you on the floor, she said, knowing full well that she already had. Trebecca made no attempt to get up. She simply laid there and hoped the feeling would return to her extremities before it was time to log back in.